extremists have gathered strength and spread to every region of the planet. Rogue regimes represented in this body not only support terrorists, but threaten other nations and their own people with the most destructive weapons known to humanity. Authority and authoritarian powers seek to collapse the values, the systems, and alliances that prevented conflict and tilted the world toward freedom since World War II. International criminal networks traffic drugs, weapons, people, forced dislocation and mass migration, threaten our borders, and new forms of aggression exploit technology to menace our citizens. To put it simply, we meet at a time of both immense promise and great peril. It is entirely up to us whether we lift the world to new heights or let it fall into a valley of disrepair.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zone. Massive Media welcomes you once again to another mind-blowing exposition. Today we are going to look at issues surrounding the marginalization, subjugation, and the abduction of persons in active liberation activities. What we mean by liberation is when somebody is fighting for the freedom of his people, to set the people free, utilizing United Nations instruments set aside for freedom fighters. Therefore, a freedom fighter is a person who takes part in a resistance movement against an oppressive political or social establishment. On the other hand, a resistance movement is an organized group of people that tries to resist the government or an occupying power, causing disruption and unrest in civil order and stability. Such a movement may seek to achieve its goals through either the use of violent or non-violent resistance. Example is the United States of America today during the American Revolution, or in Norway in the Second World War. A resistance movement may employ both violent and non-violent methods, usually operating under different organizations and acting in different phases or geographical areas within a country. A resistance movement can include any irregular armed force that rises up against an enforced or established authority. To make cohesion and integration more possible, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, adopted by the General Assembly on Thursday, 13th September 2007. In it, the declaration was seen as the most comprehensive international instrument on the right of indigenous people. The bone of contention of all indigenous people are located in this very paragraph. It stated that all doctrines, policies, and practices based on or advocating superiority of peoples or individuals on the basis of national origin, racial, religious, ethnic, or cultural differences are racist, scientifically false, legally invalid, morally condemned, and socially unjust. Further, it stated that indigenous people, in the exercise of their rights, should be free from discrimination of any kind. Again, it stated that the General Assembly is concerned that indigenous peoples have suffered from historic injustices as a result of, inter alia, their colonization and the dispossession of their lands, territories, and resources, thus preventing them from exercising, in particular, their right to development in accordance with their own needs and interests, unquote. It further went ahead to say, there is urgent need to respect and promote the inherent rights of indigenous peoples, which derive from their political, economic, and social structures, and from their cultures, spiritual traditions, histories, and philosophies, especially their rights to their lands, territories, and resources, unquote. These are the approvals of the General Assembly of United Nations. The General Assembly also recognized the need to respect and promote the rights of indigenous peoples affirmed in treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements with states. General Assembly also welcomed the fact that indigenous peoples are organizing themselves for political, economic, social, and cultural enhancement, and in order to bring an end to all forms of discrimination and oppression wherever they occur. The General Assembly concluded and convinced themselves that control by indigenous peoples over developments affecting them and their lands, territories, and resources will enable them to maintain and strengthen their institutions, cultures, and traditions, and to promote their development in accordance with their aspirations and need. The UN General Assembly emphasized on the contribution of demilitarization of the lands and the territories of indigenous peoples to peace, economic and social progress and development, understanding and friendly relations among nations and peoples of the world. The United Nations General Assembly, on considering this very adoption, stated that the rights affirmed in treaties, agreement, and constructive arrangement between state and indigenous peoples are in some situations matters of international concern, interest, responsibility, and character, unquote. In making these instruments legalistic, the General Assembly stated that it acknowledged the Charter of these United Nations, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as the Vienna Declaration and the Program of Action, affirm the fundamental importance of the right of self-determination of all peoples, by virtue of which they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, bearing in mind that nothing in this declaration may be used to deny any peoples their right of self-determination exercised in conformity with international law. This is the General Assembly Declaration. And all these articles and instruments were signed by states that believed in this very instrument. Again, they accepted to give the indigenous people around them, around the states, around the nationalities, the right to take absolute control of whichever right they find in this instrument and adopt them for themselves, for their own economic development and cultural development. It is on this basis we are going to carry out our analysis today. However, we are going to use two nations or two countries as example of these indigenous people's activities and their subjugators, their occupiers, and those who believe they are born to rule with impunity, taking state advantage as an instrument of lording themselves over the indigenous people. These two nations we are going to use today are Kenya. Capital is Nairobi, with the late Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya as the freedom fighter and activist who was tortured, arrested, detained, imprisoned, and later liberated Kenya. But it is unfortunate that a man whose father suffered as an activist, detained and punished, was alive during his tenure as a president of Kenya, that another activist was abducted and rendition out of his country, no inquiries, no going to court against the government that abducted the man in his country. Now,
to redeem our country from the yoke of colonialism and imperialism, and to be able to build the Kenya that Africans can be proud of.
The United States is now taking that decisive action to end this grave economic injustice. Our goal is simple. We want balanced trade that is both fair and reciprocal. We have worked closely with our partners in Mexico and Canada to replace NAFTA with the brand new and hopefully bipartisan U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Tomorrow I will all around the world and throughout history is once again thrown into stark relief. It is the divide between those whose thirst for control deludes them into thinking they are destined to rule over others, and those people and nations who want only to rule themselves. I have the immense privilege of addressing you today
and we will reflect back on history, on Jomo Kenyatta, the Kenyan activist. History informed us that Jomo Kenyatta, the father of Uhuru Kenyatta, was a Kenyan anti-colonial activist and politician. He led Kenya African National Union, Kanu, from 1961 till his death in 1978. First, let us look at his political activities in comparison with Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's activism. Late Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, who was anti-colonial activist, was under surveillance by the British MI5 intelligence service, who intercepted and read all his letters because he was in Soviet Union. Between 1939 to 1945, British government continued to monitor Jomo Kenyatta, even though it was during the Second World War. See what will incriminate him. In January 1952, Jomo Kenyatta was the president of KAU, and its members formed a secret central committee devoted to direct actions, formulated along a cell structure. Between 1952 to 1953, Jomo Kenyatta was credited as saying, I quote, "We Africans are in majority and we should have self-government," unquote. On the other hand, he stated that this does not mean we should not take account of white, provided we have the key position. We want to be friendly with whites. We don't want to be dominated by them, unquote. Daily Express of September 1952. Militant wing of KAU, the Mau Mau Society, led by the Dan.
What we have been struggling for is to redeem our country from the yoke of colonialism.
1952. First, the militants realized that it was their tribesmen that were sabotaging the struggle activities, collaborating with the British colonial officers and the police to sabotage the struggle.
And imperialism, and to be able to build the Kenya that Africans can be proud of.
And arrest members of KAU, led by Jomo Kenyatta. This sabotage led to the killing of many Kikuyu tribal chiefs and some individuals, including British police officers and the soldiers. This Mau Mau militant group was forced to rebel against the British authority, especially after the British colonial governor Evelyn Baring on October 21st, 1952 ordered the colonial police to arrest Jomo Kenyatta, the president of KAU. This means that there is no struggle that devoid the militant group. The problem always remains that the government in authority or in power do not want to negotiate. Rather, they will use government instruments like police, military to suppress the agitators, which at the end will always be political negotiation. This is why it was easy to blame the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, whose father had these experiences but could not save or protect Mazi Nnamdi Kanu in Kenya. At the same time, he has not made a categorical statement dissociating himself confidently. Malami, the former justice minister, implicated him in one way or the other when he said that it was the collaborative operation of the international police that made it possible for him to be arrested in Kenya. That is an indictment, although the Kenyan government objected that they did not know anything about the kidnap or presence of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu in Kenya. This did not exonerate him. The question is, who were the policemen? Who were they torturing the activists? They were all blacks and from the same ethnic group with the Jomo Kenyatta and his fellow activists. Therefore, it is not surprising what is taking place in Biafran struggle. It has happened before, and it will continue happening even after Biafran declaration. Sabotage is part of the struggle, but those who persist will overcome the sabotage and win their victory. Thank you very much. With this, we come to the end of this very program. We ask you to subscribe, like, share, and leave your comment. Till we come to you again with part 2 of this very program. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.